Hi, I'm Dr. Len Calabrese, Professor of Medicine and Vice Chairman of Rheumatic and Immunologic Diseases at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine of Case Western Reserve University. I'm joined today by two outstanding faculty, Dr. Russ Cohen and Dr. Edward Lee. Dr. Cohen is a professor of medicine at the Pritzker School of Medicine and director of the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Center, co-director of the Advanced IBD Fellowship Program at the University of Chicago. Dr. Lee is professor of pharmacy practice at the University of New England College of Pharmacy in Portland, Maine. The learning objectives of this exercise is to distinguish biosimilars from generics in the management of inflammatory diseases and summarize this, this term interchangeability we use with biosimilars in differentiating how they're used. Today's activity also includes a unique perspective. We have put the voice of the patient literally and figuratively in the center of this program. These are patients with inflammatory disease who are extremely active in social media, online, and what have you, in their respective communities of inflammatory diseases. Their responses represent the voices of millions of people living with inflammatory diseases in the United States. And we ask these individuals to share their thoughts with us on the very topics that we'll be discussing today. Throughout this program, you'll see and hear what they have to say. And let's begin this activity with a discussion of biosimilars and how they differentiate from generics. And I might also add that we're going to do this in 15 minutes here. So this is the advanced course, the very crisp. So Russ, let's start out here. Crisply, biologics, biosimilars, generics, differentiate them for us as succinctly as you can.
Well, sure. So, you know, the generic drugs are terms that we commonly use for small molecules, pill medication, whether it be hypertension or cholesterol, whatever it may be. After the drug either comes to the end of its patent life or whatever it may be, there can be generic versions that come out. Those are identical copies of the drug. The only difference would be what the fillers might be. They're easy to manufacture, they're easy to copy, they're not very complex, and there's very little or no issues of antigenicity or immunogenicity. In contrast, especially the biologic monoclonal antibodies are very large, very complex agents. There is not possible to do a generic copy of it, but you can do a biosimilar, and a biosimilar is a development of, in this case, a monoclonal antibody that is highly similar as far as efficacy, safety, immunogenicity, with no clinically significant differences. So you're never going to make a carbon copy of a complex monoclonal antibody as a biosimilar, but it's similar enough that it covers all those bases.
That term, I've heard it before, no clinically significant differences. Does that come from a regulatory definition?
Absolutely. That is the FDA's definition, that it can no clinically significant differences between the two. I
assume that that's determined by a constellation of ex vivo detailed analytics, as well as some clinical assessment of pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, as well as some kind of clinical endpoint. All
absolutely. You take the originator drug, which primarily was developed from whatever the compound, let's say infliximab was, and then going through all the steps that you mentioned, and then spent a lot of time and money in large-scale clinical trials in all the different indications where it's approved, while the biosimilar spends the time and money proving that your agent is a biosimilar to, in this case, the infliximab or the adalimumab, whatever it may be, and then the clinical part is much smaller, just has to prove that it works. They typically do it in 2 diseases.
I want to throw this out because I think it's a useful term that is bannered about a lot in these discussions, and that's totality of evidence, and that's what regulatory looks, taking all of this stuff, putting it together, and to make this adjudication of whether this reaches the standard of being declared a biosimilar. Is this fair?
And what totality of the evidence really means is that at each subsequent step in the regulatory process of the accumulation of data, what additional question are you answering that would address your concerns about biosimilarity? So it really starts with that highly similar exercise. And the reason why we use the term highly similar instead of identical is because protein products by nature are heterogeneous. So with the reference product, between each lot, they're a little bit different from each other, and then over time, they're different as well. So it is impossible to have something identical. The reference product is not even identical to itself. So that analytical exercise is very, very important, and then with each subsequent step answers any residual concerns through either clinical exercises or the functional studies.
So at the present time in the United States, and we're only talking about biosimilars in the field of immune-mediated inflammatory diseases. There are other growth factors and hormones that have been produced. But Russ, we have some available or approved, or
Sure.
both?
Yeah, so there's 4 approved agents to cover those diseases that we discussed. 2 of them are infliximab, 1 was an adalimumab, and 1 is an etanercept. Currently available on the market is only 1 of the infliximab agents.
All right, so we have our definition. We are already at a point in time in 2017, in July, that we actually have approved agents and some early availability of these. So the question is, how are they going to be used? Initial, or people who are on originator drugs and switching? Can we go back and forth? And this term comes up perpetually in these discussions, and I hear this word interchangeability, and I've actually had some difficulty understanding this term in its regulatory capacity, because I think interchangeability means, well, if it's biosimilar and it's highly similar and it's not clinically significant, isn't that interchangeable?
Yeah, so the interchangeability designation is another designation put on top of a biosimilar so that it effectively behaves like a generic product in the marketplace, meaning that these would be appropriate to be substituted for the reference product without me, a pharmacist, having to call the prescriber. And because of this additional regulatory designation, that requires additional data that the FDA says that the biosimilar manufacturer has to submit about if you switch it back and forth between the biosimilar and the reference, it has to be clinically the same as the reference product. And so this is where a lot of confusion is that people think that if something isn't designated as being interchangeable, I'm not allowed to switch, which isn't the case. A clinician can determine to make a change regardless of the interchangeability designation.
So as of this moment, Russ, you can write for a biosimilar as starting out a patient, or you can take a patient that's been on a branded infliximab and switch them to a biosimilar infliximab. And Ed, you cannot initiate this yourself without prescriber approval at this moment.
Absolutely, because we do not have any designated interchangeable biosimilars.
Okay. With that groundwork, what's the hubbub about? Why are we talking about these drugs? Who stands to gain?
The biggest reason for having biosimilars is having market competition so that we can decrease costs, increase efficiencies within our health systems, improve access to biological medications, have innovation, and hopefully we can improve outcomes in the long run. So there's this kind of broad societal benefit with biosimilars. We know that healthcare costs continue to rise, and this is one way to mitigate the increases in healthcare expenditures.
So I understand that these are more readily utilized in Europe right now. And I've heard some stories of significant cost savings. Can you share any of that with us?
Yeah, there's specifically in Norway, they saw a massive reduction in their infliximab expenditures by allowing essentially the manufacturers to compete and bid for essentially a one contract. And so because of that, they came at a specific price point, which is very, very reasonable, and they decided to go with that and saw, I believe, was about a 60% reduction.
60% reduction.
Right.
That, I mean, it's pretty impressive. And it also shows the power of negotiating as a single payer system.
Absolutely.
And at this time, we're
But Norway's an outlier, clearly an outlier. Even other countries in Europe haven't had such a big, it really varies in the individual countries. There's available other places in the world. The Norway is an outlier, although it's interesting to see as things develop in the United States marketplace what the actual costs will be.
And generally, the consensus is we're probably going to see a 30% price reduction and expenditure reduction on these products.
even 30%. I mean, I know some of my patients are spending $50,000 a year through their insurance to get a number of these drugs, and 30% of that is a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Now the question is, who's going to save the money?
That's a very interesting question, and hopefully we
These are
see
interesting
that.
times.
Yes, exactly. Hopefully we see that translated over to the patient in terms of their out-of-pocket costs. Certainly, the society as a whole will benefit. That will hopefully lead to reductions in premium increases over time as well. So the patients will get that, whether or not it's a copay reduction or reduction in premiums. It'll eventually trickle to the patients. The other side of it is when we talk about payment reform and reimbursement reform, having the provider and the practice take on more financial risk and being paid for quality and episodes of care, biosimilars and kind of cost and price reductions in particular products are going to be very, very attractive to individual practices, and they hopefully will be able to pass that savings on to their patients as well.
Yeah.
So Russ, who's going to be the deciders?
Decide as far as what the patients get.
Yeah.
Well, currently what happens when we have a patient in inflammatory bowel disease or rheumatoid diseases, and probably dermatologic diseases too, we may have an idea of what medicine we want to give, but in reality, you say to the patient, we have to check with your insurance to see if it's going to pay for it because the cost of the medications. As far as determining whether the insurance will pay for a branded versus a biosimilar will depend on each individual case. In the United States, it's very interesting with the introduction of one and now two biosimilar infliximabs, one on the market, two FDA approved. The manufacturer of the branded infliximab has, in some cases, met or nearly met the price reduction in certain contracts. So, it remains to be seen what's going to happen in the U.S. I think the good news is that the prices are coming down across the board, and I think many of us feel that the patients shouldn't have to wait for anything to trickle down to them, but it should be directly applied. So if there is you mentioned a 30% decrease in the cost to the payer, which is a huge amount because of the cost of these drugs, the patients many of them can't make the payments without the support of the pharma companies that are helping them out right now, should get that directly. And there shouldn't be any trickle. It should go directly to the patients and not into the pockets of the
Well, we certainly
companies.
hope so. And that brings us up. I think I'd like to turn and actually hear a voice of one of our patients and see what they have to say and react to it.
There are a lot of people that are afraid to go on them because they just haven't been out for very long. Of course, everybody likes the price point. They wish they were even cheaper than they are. The conversation is started more by the patient than really the rheumatologist.
Well, I hear a lot in those comments. And, from my own personal perspective as a rheumatologist, I have not had any detailed conversations with patients about biosimilars, nor have I had any patients actually coming to asking about them, even though obviously well poised to engage in this. But I am prepared to do so. And, and the first thing that I'm going to ask patients is, what is your healthcare provider telling you about this? Show me what they're sharing with you. Have you seen anything firsthand?
Well, whenever I start patients, currently there's at least approved infliximab and adalimumab biosimilars. I do tell patients we're starting them currently on the brand name. I said, by the way, there are biosimilars that have been FDA approved. One of them's available now. These are felt by the FDA to have no clinically significant difference between that. But I said, what drug you actually get will most likely be determined by your payer. But I have no patients so far, this is July 27, 2017, no patients have said to me, their payer has actually said to them, you need to do the biosimilar, even offered it to them. It's really not something under the physician's control at the current time, what the payers will pay for.
At the current time. And what about the pharmacist's role in this right now?
Yeah, pharmacists will be important in terms of especially in the specialty pharmacy area. So say if your patient is not allowed to receive their infusion at their clinic, has to go to an offsite clinic, and that's the specialty pharmacy. So they're going to be the ones that are actually adjudicating the claim and seeing specifically which one it actually is preferred through their insurance as well.
So there's a lot of decision making to go around here. So I'd like to close by listening to one more patient commentary, and we'll try to go out with that.
I think doctors are completely willing and open to give as much information as possible if the patient is open to accepting it. I think it definitely depends on the patient's motivation level and what they're willing to know based on part of where they are in the journey.
Well, I appreciate that comment and the faith that their providers will do that, and I feel that way as well. I also want to add that I think there is a huge role for the advanced practitioner in this. My nurse practitioner, Betsy, has much more granular conversations with my patients about their, the practical and delivery aspects of their medications than I do. And, there's a big need for education among advanced practitioners.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in our practice, we actually have numerous advanced practice professionals, advanced practice nurses. Some groups have physician assistants, but patient education is key. This is the complex diseases, complex medications. An appropriately trained APN or PA can be critical to helping you succeed with your practice.
Okay. Well, it's a great 15-minute summary of a very complex field. I want to thank both of you for contributing. I want to thank all of you for watching. There's many online resources that we have available for you. Please come back and pick these up. Thank you.